How does TCU win this game if it happens? I want to bounce some things off of you. Because as you do your research and you look at the bigger point spread underdogs in championship games, whether it be this side of the fence in college football or the Super Bowl, you find some pretty alarming statistics for the favorite. These things sometimes produce outright upsets when you have point spreads around this margin. At least those are the ones you remember. Forget about all that because it doesn't matter tomorrow night. I want to get that out of the way because it's going to be spoken about a lot over the next 24 hours. But what does have to happen? First thing, the number 4. Got a good coaching buddy of mine. We chopped this up earlier this week. I was thinking 3, he was thinking 4, but the magic number, let's just call it 4. And that magic number is the combination of special teams plays or big turnovers. If you take all of those and they add up to 4 or more, ideally for TCU, at the very least, you've got a 4-quarter game. You could have an outright upset on your hands. I know that's easier said than done because everyone gets drunk on thinking about the reward in those kinds of propositions. As you and I well know, there's also risk in that proposition, but what are you going to do? The alternative is pulling out of here and heading to Fort Worth after the game tomorrow night, knowing you left bullets in your chamber. You certainly don't want to do that. And so 4. If you think 3, maybe 3. I think 4. Secondly, and this is pretty common sense, it's pretty obvious, but I think they need to do more of it. They got to hit explosive plays. Now, this is a key anytime you face Georgia. Believe it or not, it's not always the key to winning a game, but a lot of games, this one included, it will be. I think Georgia will hit some. Okay, so the reality is for TCU, you may very well be having to either match points or you may find yourself in catch-up mode. You can't just assume that you're going to bang, bang, bang right out of the gate like you did against Michigan. What you've got to be able to do to stay in it is hit explosive plays because there will be no methodical drives, or at least it would very much surprise me if TCU went on 1 or 2 methodical, 13-play, 86-yard, 8-minute, 47-second time of possession drives tomorrow night. If they do, hats off. I'm wrong about them. That's not necessarily the way you're going to dent the scoreboard against Georgia. And they've got to take advantage of it via Quentin Johnson. They've also got to take advantage of it via Max Duggan's legs. I don't ever watch a game where Max Duggan plays and say he left anything in the tank. So this is just another one of those games where he's got to empty the tank. It will give you fits. It's one thing if you've got a statue back there and you're trying to account for a guy like Quentin Johnson. Difficult, but doable. But, when you're playing man, which Georgia plays a whole lot of, and those clearing routes open up run for a quarterback and that quarterback options to run, it doesn't take long before that's in the back of a defender's mind, and explosive plays lead to more explosive plays in that manner. Explosive play rate, got to be edge TCU. It wasn't last week, actually, against Michigan. It's got to be this week. Thirdly, if you'll watch the way TCU plays, okay, the mesh is a big point of emphasis. And offensively, they screw with you a lot. And there is a school of thought out there. Again, when it comes to feedback I've gotten from coaches this week, there's a school of thought that Kirby Smart, and even previously when he coached under Saban, sometimes Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, sometimes those defenses, which are extremely complex, which use a whole lot of pattern matching, which cause you to know how to do a lot of things and react to a lot of things simultaneously on the field. Sometimes they get a little too complicated against offenses, which can screw you up at the mesh point like TCU does. And when you just subtly watch what they do in the backfield, you may have to watch it a couple of times unless you're watching as a coach, in which you see it immediately. You watch how many guys enter that frame. You watch how many guys are at that mesh point. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. And those linebackers sometimes can get caught in the wash because of that. So if you want to know how we revert back to point number 2, how does TCU win the explosive play game? Well, you may do it like that. Doesn't always have to be a bomb. There doesn't always have to be an arc on that pass. Sometimes it's a pass underneath. Sometimes it's a simple crossing route. Sometimes it's an H-back that angles out. After that mesh confuses those linebackers, crazy things can happen. That has to happen a lot for TCU, but crazy things can happen. And here's the last point. It's really tough sometimes when you look at these big games and you look at the big setting. Everyone blows it up. I'm not going to say out of proportion. This is absolutely, it's the national championship game. Of course, it's huge. We're outside in 50-degree weather. So, yes, obviously, it's a really, really big deal. If you can turn a 60-minute game into a 15-minute game, point spreads don't matter anymore. Recruiting rankings and talent level still matters. But the gap, obviously, between the totality that takes over 60 minutes versus it's 23-23 entering the fourth quarter. We got to weather this thing for 15 more minutes. Guys, that comes down to a couple of possessions per team. That comes down to a couple of plays per team. Now, big-time players normally still make those plays, but at that point, the cumulative effect of having all those 4- and 5-star players versus your lack thereof, number one, I think can be more than made up for in a 15-minute interval because TCU's got more experience than just about any team you'll see at this level, short of like BYU. And secondly, the intangible of pressure is a real thing. And I don't know how to quantify it, so I don't really talk about it a whole lot. But it's hard to repeat. That's something Georgia's been dealing with all year. So forget about how hard it is to repeat in theory. Just think about getting there. Okay, think about how you had some things that you thought would probably work and get you margin in the game. Well, if this scenario plays out and it's a tie game or it's very close entering the fourth quarter, that didn't happen. So a lot of the things that you thought would knock them out early didn't happen. And it surprises you sometimes. When you do think you're superior, Georgia absolutely does. And you look over and you've landed shots and that guy's still standing, kind of like Ohio State was last week. That guy's still standing. It does something to you. And all of a sudden you realize, well, there's the finish line over there. We're not in round 3 or round 4. This is an old school fight. Round 13, round 14, he's still standing. Are we going to have to win on points here? We're going to have to count on the judges? Or what's going to happen here? My point is, if you make this a 15-minute game, which combines all of these keys we just talked about, don't think for a second an upset can't happen. I think it's really interesting as you look at the 12 or 13 point spread on this game. Sometimes, we try and describe how a point spread is formulated by thinking of games as being simulated 1,000 times, and that's just the average. Georgia wins by 12.5 on average. But here's the thing. Some games are more high variance than others. Some have a higher potential volatility rate. And that just means there is a wider margin of potential outcome. If you were to look at a scatter plot of those 1,000 outcomes, when Iowa plays Wisconsin, there is not a big scatter plot. It's like back in the day. I used to love betting 2-team 7-point teasers in NFL playoffs because when the Jags, congratulations, by the way, to Jacksonville, when the Jags or the Titans or the Steelers, when they would play each other, it was just a 3 or 7-point game every single time. This game's not like that. There is a 40-10 Georgia victory in the cards tomorrow night. There is a 31-24 TCU win in there. There's a lot of variance to the potential outcome here. So just because you see a 13-point spread, it doesn't mean that an upset is nearly as unlikely as a normal 13-point spread would make you think. Because of the dynamic that TCU's offense has and because of the dynamic they have in regards to winning those non-offensive point battles, doing a lot of things, stealing possessions, and those things matter so much. So as I see it, those are the keys to the way that this game could happen tomorrow night.
Thanks for watching, guys. Don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. Make sure you like the video and please subscribe to the channel. Not just for me, that's how we keep this entire thing free.